All right, welcome back. This is going to be the final video for the endocrine system. So this is video 8. Um, so that's chapter 18, spring 2025, Panola College. So in this video, we're going to talk just two simple concepts. That is hormone interactions and the stress response. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll go through the 4 different types of hormone interactions, and then we'll talk about the different stages of the stress response. So we usually study hormones individually, but the extracellular fluids contain a mixture of hormones whose concentrations are always changing. Okay, hormones are increasing in quantity, decreasing in quantity, depending on negative feedback, positive feedback, this, that, and the other. And so the concentrations are constantly in flux, and thus, uh, we always have to talk about the interactions between the hormones. As a result, cells never respond to only one hormone. Instead, they respond to multiple hormones. Okay, so the idea here is just that no one hormone operates in isolation. There are thousands of different hormones that are, um, exerting their effects, on a regular basis. Um, so when a cell receives instructions from 2 hormones at the same time, 4 outcomes are possible. And these are those 4 outcomes: antagonistic, synergistic, permissive, and integrative. So we'll talk about each one of these. Okay, so the antagonistic effect, in this type of effect, the 2 hormones in questions have opposing effects. Okay, so what happens? Let's see here. Where's my red pen? Sorry. Okay. So similar to the first fight between T'Challa and his cousin N'Jaka and Black Panther, how they had kind of equal and opposite effects on one another, had opposing philosophies. That is what will take place in the antagonistic effect when it comes to hormone interactions. Okay? The net result depends on the balance between the 2 hormones. Okay? And in general, when 2 antagonistic hormones are present, the observed effects are weaker than those produced by either hormone unopposed. Okay? So, essentially what that means is, once these 2 hormones go at it, their effects they're not going to be as strong, you know, uh, they're not going to be as strong compared to if either hormone operated unopposed, essentially what that means. Okay. So for example, we saw this example a little bit earlier on in the chapter, but if you have high glucose levels, that will lead to the release of insulin, which will lead to blood glucose levels decreasing. Low blood glucose levels will lead to the release of glucagon. Remember, glucose all gone. And that will lead to an increase in blood glucose levels. So these 2 hormones right here, insulin and glucagon, can kind of think of them as, T'Challa and N'Jaka in this particular clip, operating, opposing one another, but the balance that they produce is ultimately, beneficial. So that's the antagonistic effect. All right, synergistic effect. So in this type of effect, the two hormones in question have additive effects, okay? So if we take a look at this clip here from Avengers Endgame, where Thor kind of gives Iron Man a supercharge so he can attack Thanos. They are essentially combining their abilities, their powers, so that they can fight a common foe, okay? So when two synergistic hormones are present, the observed effects are greater than the effect that each would produce acting alone. If Iron Man were to attack Thanos, that would be one thing. If Thor were to attack him by himself, that'd be another thing. But them acting with their combined power and strength produced a kind of supercharged attack. Okay. In some cases, the net result is greater than the sum of the hormone's individual effects. So, to be clear, what that means is you can have, say this is hormone 1, this is hormone 2, say they are acting on the same target cell at the same time. Okay? What this is saying is that when hormone 1 and hormone 2 combine and collectively act on a target cell, this is always going to be greater than this over here. So the net result of them acting synergistically will always be greater than the sum of the hormone's individual effects. Okay. All right. So an example of this, FSH and LH, the two gonadotropic hormones acting synergistically on the ovary to produce an oocyte or an egg. Okay. Egg production is more efficient and effective when these two hormones act synergistically. Okay. All right. So that's your synergistic effect. Permissive effect. So in this type of effect, one hormone is needed for another to produce its effect. And the net result of this effect, the net result is the effect of the second hormone. Okay. So essentially what's happening here, well, actually, let's take a look at the clip first. If any of you have seen the classic movie 300, love this movie actually because my wife and I actually saw this on our first date way back when in 2007. There are a number of scenes from the movie that are always etched in my mind, but the This Is Sparta scene is just classic, and it kind of illustrates the permissive effect. So in the clip, King Leonidas is looking back to his queen, his wife, to essentially get permission to kick this dude down the hole in the middle of his kingdom. Okay, so what happens in your permissive effect is one essentially gives the okay to 2 or activates 2, and then 2 will exert its effect on the target cell. Okay, so the net result is the effect of the second hormone, or right here. Okay, so if you look here, T3 acting on the target cell without receptors, and if you look here, epinephrine acting on that same target cell with receptors, you're going to get that fight or flight response. Okay, so you have that permissive effect occurring here, leading to that fight or flight response, and thus you have one hormone kind of giving permission to another. So that's your permissive effect, in action here for your hormone interactions. Okay. And lastly, we have the integrative effect. And in this type of effect, hormones produce different but complementary results in specific tissues and organs. Okay. Integrative effects are important in coordinating the activities of diverse physiological symptoms. Okay. So the classic example that is given to illustrate the integrative effect is that of homeostasis. Okay. And I always love explaining the concept of homeostasis by showing this particular clip from Avengers Age of Ultron. And the reason why I like this clip to illustrate homeostasis is because if you look at the clip, you have about, I want to say maybe 6 or 7 Avengers there, and they are all doing their own thing. Okay, Captain America, Scarlet Witch, Vision, Thor, Hulk, they are all fighting their common enemy at the same time, but they're doing so, individually. But the thing that is notable about the clip is that they are all doing their thing at the same time. Like Captain America is not waiting for Scarlet Witch to do her thing. Scarlet Witch is not waiting for Vision to do his thing. They are all acting individually, but they're all acting at the same time. And so in a very similar fashion, you will have multiple systems in the body that will act at the same time in order to maintain balance or homeostasis. Okay, so if you think about, we go back to calcitonin and PTH. They are both released under different circumstances, and even though they act in opposition to one another, they ultimately act to maintain balance of calcium in the blood by keeping it within a certain range. Okay, so whenever you see the term integrative effect, you want to think equilibrium, homeostasis. Hormones that act in antagonistic ways can also act in integrative ways. So that's essentially what I just said here. Calcitonin and PTH are antagonists, but ultimately they act in an integrative way. Okay, so you could say the same thing about insulin and glucagon. They act in opposition to one another, but ultimately they're going to act in an integrative way as well. Okay. All right. So that is it for the hormone interactions. What we're going to do now is we're going to go through the stress response. Before we get to that, have a short clip from one of my favorite shows of all time. So here we go.
I'm on no sleep. No sleep. You don't know what it's like in there. All night long, things are creaking and cracking, and that red light is burning my brain.
You look a little stressed.
Oh, I'm stressed.
So, Kramer, what am I supposed to do if I don't have that fur hat by 4 o'clock? They're going to take me down like Nixon.
You know my friend Bob Sacramento?
Oh, he was Kramer's friend.
Well, he called last night about 3 a.m. and we got to talking. He sells Russian hats down at Battery Park. $40.
$40? Are they sabled?
No, but the difference is negligible.
Oh, yeah, I like this idea.
All right, let's give it a shot. Let's go.
Giddy up.
All right, so that's a clip from Seinfeld, of course, just illustrating the stress response, which is a good segue into our discussion on the stress response. So, any condition, physical or emotional, that threatens or disrupts homeostasis is classified as stress. You guys might be feeling stress right now, being in AMP2, but no worries. We're going to get through this together, I promise. Okay. Specific homeostatic adjustments oppose many stresses. And in addition to specific responses, the body utilizes a general response to stress composed of hormonal and physiological adjustments. Okay, so the body has a way to essentially respond to stress in any form that it may take. These responses are collectively referred to as the general adaptation syndrome or the stress response. And the stress response is going to have 3 phases, which we are going to go through right now. Okay. Give me 1 second. FaceTime. You can. All right. So the alarm phase is the first phase. And what happens here, this is going to be short term in nature. Okay. There's going to be an immediate response to stress, and it's going to be directed by the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. We have seen this, make its appearance multiple times throughout the chapter. When you think sympathetic, you want to think epinephrine and norepinephrine, fight or flight. Okay. Energy reserves, primarily glucose, are utilized. That is what I have depicted over here. Okay, so if you recall from AMP1, energy stores are used in the following order. You have your carbohydrates, you have your lipids, and then you have your proteins. So carbohydrates, aka glucose, are always used first, lipids are always used second, and proteins are always used third. So here in the alarm phase, which is the first phase of the stress response, you're going to be using your carbohydrate reserves or glucose reserves first. Okay. The body will prepare multiple fight or flight responses. Once again, epinephrine and norepinephrine, fight or flight, go hand in hand. Epinephrine, otherwise known as adrenaline, is the dominant hormone. So if you look here, because of your general sympathetic activation and the effects of epinephrine, norepinephrine, you can have increased mental alertness, increased energy use, mobilization of glycogen and lipid reserves, changes in circulation, decreased digestive activity, increased sweat production, increased heart rate and respiratory rate. All of these are consistent with the fight or flight response. Okay. So when you think alarm phase, think fight or flight. Okay. All right. The resistance phase is your second phase. And what is going on here? This is a more long-term phase in the stress response. And this occurs if stress lasts longer than a few hours. Okay. This may last for weeks or months at a time. And because this is happening over a longer period of time, you're going to tap into your lipid and protein reserves for this particular phase. Okay. Glucose on the other hand, is conserved for use by nervous tissue. Okay, glucose is going to be conserved for use by nervous tissue. That is a classic characteristic of the resistance phase. So if you see a phrase or term like that on a test question, you need to be thinking the resistance phase, okay, or anything related to the resistance phase. So, for example, if there's a question on the test that says something about glucose being conserved for nervous tissue, and they ask you something about which energy reserves are most likely to be utilized in this particular phase, the answer would be lipids and proteins. Okay. Glucocorticoids are the dominant hormones here in this particular phase, and that's what you see here. Glucocorticoids and mineralocorticoids from the adrenal cortex, leading to that resistance phase. Okay. So mobilization of remaining energy reserves, lipids, and amino acids. Amino acids are essentially proteins. Conservation of glucose by peripheral tissues except nervous. Elevation of blood glucose concentration. And then conservation of salts and water, loss of potassium and hydrogen. This comes about actually because of the mineralocorticoid and the glucocorticoid effect. Okay. And then finally, you have the exhaustion phase. This represents when the homeostatic regulation just breaks down completely. Unless corrective measures are taken immediately, the failure of one or more systems proves fatal. Okay, so this can result in death. Aldosterone is the dominant hormone here, and this will lead to increased cellular sodium and decreased cellular potassium. Okay, so increased cellular sodium and decreased cellular potassium. So sodium's going to come in, potassium's going to head out. As the body's potassium content decreases, a variety of cells will malfunction. And that is because a good number of cells in the body, if you recall from the nervous system last semester, will use potassium for repolarization of pretty much every tissue in the body. Okay, so if a tissue cannot repolarize, it cannot depolarize. If it can't depolarize, it can't function. Okay, because remember that all cells have to repolarize before they can depolarize again. All right, every cell has to wait its turn. So without repolarization, cells are essentially just gonna break down and die. So that's what the exhaustion phase represents. All right, next chapter is the blood. That's chapter 19 in the book. That chapter will not be as long as this chapter, so just look forward to that. But I always like to end each chapter that I do with a quote, and this one is from Maya Angelou. You may not control all the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them. Happy studying, everybody. This concludes the endocrine system, and I will see you next with the blood. Take care.